There's this really big orchestral run. So it's taking that same melodic idea, that four-note melody, and creating this whole build out of it. I'm Kris Bowers, I'm the composer for The Wild Robot, and I'm gonna take you behind the song for a cue I wrote called I Could Use a Boost. Mike Knobloch and Natalie Hayden from Universal reached out. They asked if I'd be interested, but they sent me the book first. And so I read the book, and it came at a pretty pivotal time for me because I just had my daughter. My daughter was like 6 months old when I got the call, and so I was reading the book in a weekend, mostly to her. And then I went in and had a meeting with Chris Sanders and Jeff Herman, where Chris talked me through his vision for the movie, showed me some of their concept art, and talked about the role that music would play. Whenever I start my process, I watch a movie a number of times, and I'm looking for a moment that like just viscerally makes me feel something, and like that's kind of my way in. This sequence is the one that just spoke to me emotionally very clearly right away. I know I can go to the piano and try to make myself feel that way again because I know where that feeling is I'm trying to get after. My daughter was about a year old when I started this cue. This sequence feels like, you know, sending your kid off to college in a lot of ways. And so I played it for Chris, and Chris reminded me of the fact that this is kind of like the most emotionally complex moment in the movie. They're not saying the words, I love you, they're not saying goodbye, but they may not see each other ever again. And Roz has been kind of preparing Brightbill and giving him all the tools to leave her. I remember coming back home and talking to my wife about it and like looking at my daughter and thinking about this moment in a different way emotionally, and thinking about like how I'm gonna fail her and how there's gonna be moments where she feels like even though I tried my best, I fell short of what she needs. And something I realized I didn't really want to think about, but it was really helpful to then feel all those emotions. And then I go to the piano and just try to improvise to like find something. So the discovery of this theme came from meditating on and thinking about these ideas of being like an imperfect parent. And at this time I was just working to black and white pencil sketches of the sequence, but I was still trying to write to picture. And Chris actually suggested that I write away from picture because he was like, I can feel the music is trying to bend itself to fit this version of the movie that's not even complete yet. He was like, why don't you just write the music and just have the music be something that develops on its own, and then we will edit and animate to match the music. And that's something that doesn't happen really ever, and felt very freeing for me to then focus on, like, now that I have this emotion clear for Chris, I can just focus on that and try to build something off of that.
I am honored to have met you. You are a credit to whatever species it is you belong to.
A bit worse for wear, I'm afraid.
I remember I played this sequence for my wife. It was the first thing I played for her, and kind of the only thing I played for her for most of the time I worked on the movie. I just played her this moment with my daughter, and my wife started crying watching it, and then my daughter was like, why are you crying? It's because the baby bird left with left the mama, and like she was like trying to understand that complexity. Storytelling wise, it's why it was something I reacted to, and then I was just trying to capture that in the music.
I'm glad you're going where you belong.
Roz,
We ended up with mostly live instrumentation here. I mean, the orchestra is like, I think it's over 100 pieces in total, like when you add choir and everybody else. And then there's some synths on it. You know, when I watched this sequence and I told Chris I wanted to tackle it, the thing that became very clear is like, not only is this gonna be so challenging because it's arguably the most important scene in the movie, it's also, when I was working on it, you already have no actors, no dialogue pretty much. It was trying to feel all of these things. And like I said, I started with piano because that's kind of my main instrument, and just kind of improvising, and came across a chord progression I felt like really matched that feeling. Just aspects of like the harmony that feels emotional, but also even adding dissonances in there intentionally to me created this feeling of longing. And something else that Kris talked about was wanting to have this sense of momentum from the very first note. He described it as when you see those old movies where somebody's on a train and somebody's on the platform and the train starts moving, and like once that happens, you're like this is it. Like there's no stopping this train, and they're saying goodbye. And so that idea of momentum, once I had the progression, I started with a piano figure. And that piano motor starts the cue off and kind of sets this pace of movement. So once I had that idea, it starts. And the next thing I wanted to do to start creating that sense of momentum is start adding these strings that are playing these ostinatos, that are these rhythmic ideas that build. So first it's this layer of strings. It also became about layering it too. So first it's, and then another layer comes in. I got this far and Kris really loved everything. And then shortly after that, I introduced another melody, and we worked on this cue for almost like 2 months. And I got to that point and Kris was like, this is really great. But he was like, what is this melody happening? And I was like trying to explain to him how I saw it developing and all this. And then he went back to that string pattern and he was like, what is that that's just happening there? And I was like, oh, that's just an ostinato. And he was like, I think that's actually the melody. So he was the one that pointed out that moment as being so melodically for him captivating that he wanted me to kind of build the whole sequence off of that. That part of the ostinato was the part that he felt drawn to. I think for him it felt like this sense of striving, and then there was also this forward motion to it that he felt like really captured this moment for him. Again, when I worked on this, it was these kind of sketches that I was reacting to, but there was a moment between Roz and Brightbill where Brightbill says, I could use a boost, and it cuts to her in this close-up. And for me, it felt like such a moment of recognition, even though it's just a black and white pencil sketch and she doesn't even have a face really. Like, and I was talking to Kris about this much later because he pointed out that I added this percussion moment there. Just that percussion hit there was something that Kris noticed and responded to, and he was like, the way it captured that moment felt so right. And I had mentioned to him that it was actually something about those black and white storyboards that made me feel like obviously we need a moment, a big hit there. And he told me that it was actually this old animation technique where he drew that frame with her head slightly stretched. So even though it was a still image, we could tell that she was like lifting her head up. And it was that motion that made it clear for me that we needed to have a hit there.
I could use a boost.
It's this really soft moment orchestrationally where we really just have like soft piano and strings playing, and then this is the first time that something that's very powerful kind of comes in. And from then on, as you can see here, that's when percussion starts to enter and then become this thing that builds throughout the course of it. It's also a moment where the synths really kick in. Them leaning back to this traditional style of animation also made me feel like the score needed to operate in a similar way, where those old animation scores are intricately orchestrated and hyper detailed, and they're referencing sometimes the greatest classical music and all of that. But then with the synths, wanting to have the synths have something that felt like it had a similar level of like intricacy and intimate relationship with the orchestration. And so her synths come in here. Just those elements by themselves give a lot of the drive in this. This is this really big, huge, sweeping moment. It's like you see this really amazing wide of like thousands of geese and all that. It's the first time the melody is really heard in the strings coming out. So the strings are kind of split up into the longs that are playing all these like chords and melodies. To me, this is like the moment where she, almost for the first time, demonstrates like a human kind of instinct, where something in her makes her feel like she needs to run and see him one more time. And I think like the realization of that could have been their final time seeing each other, that could have been their goodbye, and needing to have a little bit more. And so there's this really big, huge orchestral run that happened here. There's the strings. So it's taking that same melodic idea, that 4-note melody, and creating this whole build out of it. And same with the brass here. The percussion and everybody else having this huge build. This is one of the first times we really hear choir come in as an element. I really wanted to try to be as intentional as possible with when we use the voice. If we're making commentary on this robot becoming more human-like, then that being a texture that we hear should be something that's used very sparingly and intentionally. So it's actually only present through the score in moments where she's demonstrating these like human intentions. And I also wanted it to be pretty much wordless the entire time for a couple of reasons. One, because she's a robot, and there's something about that to me, I wanted to have it be more of a texture than like there being lyrics. Something else I really loved about this movie is how much we don't really know where we are geographically. Because of that, just using the voice and not using lyrics to me would help continue that suspension of clarity in that way, where we're not assuming that we're in America because they're speaking English, or some other place because they're speaking another language. Yeah, it's more of like a textural thing, and they're kind of singing a counter melody that's happening there. This final section to me is like setting the bar for, again, like the scope of everything, and also trying to bring all of these other elements together. Like you have the main ostinato that's been happening, you have like the piano thing that's happening, you have the main melody that's happening, and then towards the end it feels like the time is slipping away in this way because the melody starts to double up. So it first starts off with when it first starts, the melody is happening at the first tempo, essentially. And then it doubles up. Then the very last time when they're looking at each other, then we have just kind of this sense of like time running out and kind of a race to the end. And then the final moment, like, again, watching this sequence, even in the black and white pencil sketch version of it, this moment of seeing her at the top of this cliff by herself is like such a heartbreaking moment after what's happened. It's just a moment of like isolation and solitude and loneliness. And so it also felt like musically we needed to go back to just having piano.